Greetings. Let's talk about Congress. The institution that makes laws, holds the purse strings, and at least on paper is supposed to represent us, we the people. Yet it seems like the American public is and has been deeply frustrated with Congress. There's a ton of speeches and fundraising, but not much seems to get done. Is that by design, or that's what we're here to find out? Congress is constitutionally the most powerful branch of government. That is by design. The founders gave Congress the power to make laws, to declare war, collect taxes. Y'all saw this with the enumerated powers. Controlling spending, ultimately, the power of the purse. In other words, Congress decides who gets what, when, and how, which is why it matters who's in the room, what deals they cut, and who they're willing to fight or protect. The kicker, though, is if Congress is so powerful, why do people hate it? Approval ratings going back 50 years are rough. Look at this graph. It shows that you got folks from every political stripe saying, what are they doing? And yet, somehow, most members of Congress keep getting reelected again and again. That is the paradox. People hate Congress, but they like their member of Congress. They'll say, oh, no, it's not my rep that's the problem. It's all the others. What's up with that? Hyper-Partisanship, gerrymandering, and a system that rewards standing your ground more than getting anything done. Let's take a look. Now, from the outside, Congress looks slow, chaotic, and often useless. And you're not wrong to feel that way. Because yes, Congress does move slowly, but it's not just dysfunction. It was actually designed to grind. Slow is baked into the institutional structure. We've got a bicameral legislature, a House and Senate, and they're not duplicates of each other. These are two chambers with different timelines, different rules, and oftentimes different political incentives. They were designed to check each other, to slow each other down, to keep the passion of the moment from becoming the law of the land overnight. So if it feels like Congress is taking forever or stagnant, that's a feature, not a bug. At least that's what the framers would say. Looking at the House of Representatives, it's the body closest to the people, because every member represents a relatively small district, and they're up for re-election every 2 years. That's constant accountability or constant campaigning, depending on how you look at it. The House is majoritarian, meaning whoever has the most seats controls the agenda. It's a big, rowdy room of 435 members, and because of its size, it runs on rules and structure. More rules, more hierarchy. The Speaker of the House wields real power here.
In the House of Representatives, an institution of 435 people that is incredibly diverse, getting enough people in common cause, 218 people to pass anything, is a real challenge. But particularly, one of the big differences between the House and the Senate is if you're in the House of Representatives, and if you happen to be in the minority party, whenever that might be, Republicans now or Democrats in the past, it's almost an abject minority because the rules of the House control the process in such a way that the majority largely controls everything, primarily through a traffic cop called the Rules Committee. And in doing so, that committee, which is a supermajority of the majority, controls what gets to the floor of the House of Representatives, under what way it's debated, how much time, what amendments, and all that. And it can even change the legislation that you may have gotten out of another committee that ultimately comes before the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee can say, you know what, we're going to rewrite this bill and we're going to send it to the floor in a different way. In the House of Representatives, not only is getting common cause a much more difficult challenge because you need 218 votes, but you also have the differences between a majority and a minority, with the minority facing enormous hurdles to have its views or propositions be voted on.
The Senate is a whole different energy. Only 100 members, longer terms, 6 years, larger constituencies, we're talking about whole states, fewer rules, more individual freedom. Senators can flex, stall, or block legislation in ways House members only dream about. It's looser in the Senate, it's slower, it's more individualistic. And that brings us to, in the Senate, one person can grind everything to a halt. One senator can filibuster, force everyone else to pay attention to their priorities or their ego. A determined senator can delay a nomination, stall a bill, or keep the cameras rolling with a 12-hour floor speech about, well, anything. And it don't got to be 12 hours. We just saw here in the year 2025, Cory Booker with 25 hours on the floor of the U.S. Senate.
Object. And with that object,
Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama objects every time Democrats try to approve promotions for generals and admirals. In parliamentary terms, it's called a hold, and it's caused a backup of more than 250 military nominations.
What would it take for you to lift your hold on all these nominations?
all they need to do is change it back to where it was.
Tuberville is demanding that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin rescind this memo authorizing paid leave and transportation costs for service members to travel to states where abortion is legal. Otherwise, Tuberville will keep his hold on promotions to major commands around the world, as well as the heads of the armed services.
Aren't you dragging the military into politics?
I want to keep politics out of the military. It is ruining our military.
Defense Secretary Austin says Tuberville's hold harms America's national security and calls it irresponsible. Even fellow Republicans like Minority Leader Mitch McConnell have criticized Tuberville's tactics and called recent remarks he made about white nationalists unacceptable.
Do you believe they should allow white nationalists in the military?
Well, they call them that. I call them American.
Remarks he now disavows.
I'm totally against white nationalism. I'm totally against it. It's racist, okay? We don't need that in the military.
So white nationalists are unfit for service in
They
the U.S.
should not
military.
be in our military, sir.
But structure isn't the only thing slowing Congress down. Let's talk about political polarization. We've got deeper ideological divides than we've seen in decades. It isn't just about disagreement anymore, but absolute refusal to cooperate. The difference between partisanship and hyper-partisanship is as follows. A partisan sees politics as a contest between adversaries. It's a debate worth having, for example. A hyper-partisan sees it as a battle between enemies. One side must win, the other side must be destroyed. And that mindset changes everything. It changes how representatives are going to vote. It changes how they're going to negotiate or not. It changes how they want to govern or don't.
Okay, so you look here, you can see that Republicans have moved further to the right than Democrats have moved to the left going back to the 1970s. But the point is that look how they're moving apart.
Let me explain these two slides that just have gone by. Before 1994, Congress was still partisan, sure, but it was functional. It was a normal bell curve distribution of Representatives. Hyper-partisans were sidelined. They were on the far flank wings on each side. Party loyalty wasn't everything. There was space for negotiation. You had folks crossing the aisle to get big things done all the time. But after 1994, Congress started to take on a different vibe. It started the shift in Congress to a more U-curve, as you can see. 1994 is the year that Newt Gingrich led what we now call the Republican Revolution. It was a wave election and a strategy to burn the old system down. They leaned into polarization, vilified opponents, and used aggressive media tactics to frame Democrats as enemies, not rivals. Politics, as usual, went out to take a walk. Enter political warfare.
Clinton called me before the election and said, "What's going to happen?" I said, "You lose the Senate and the House." And he said, "Not going to lose the House." I said, "You are."
Democrats may lose control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. That would make Newt Gingrich Speaker.
Gingrich had persuaded the Republicans that venom was the way to succeed. Comes into Congress in the late 70s, and there's differences between Democrats and Republicans for their personal friendship. Doesn't like that.
Before Gingrich, most of the Republican leaders were gentlemen. They'd all sit down with Democrats at night and have a drink together. Newt was a bomb thrower.
It is an administration which has been systematically in favor of the pornographer and the criminal.
Gingrich had an operation called GoPack. They put out a handbook that taught Republicans how to characterize Democrats as perverts and traitors.
There is no grotesquerie, no distortion, no dishonesty, too great for them.
He says specifically, the Democrats are not good people with whom we disagree. They are immoral, they're evil, they're treasonous, they're corrupt. This was a fight of good against evil.
Good morning, everybody. The 1994 elections from coast to coast, a Republican romp. The Republicans gained 53 seats in the House of Representatives, taking control away from the Democrats for the first time in 40 years.
And if that weren't enough, let's throw in another log on the fire. Gerrymandering. Good old gerrymandering. Every 10 years, House districts get redrawn. That's called redistricting. That's the Constitution. But gerrymandering is when political parties manipulate the map to benefit themselves. It's literally legal rigging. You draw the line so your voters are packed together safely, or your opponents are spread so thin they can't win. The goal is power. Before the 1960s, things were even worse, believe it or not. Some districts had way more people than others, what we call malapportionment. One district might have 50,000 people, another 500,000. Same representation, total imbalance. Then in 1964, the Supreme Court stepped in with one person, one vote. That forced states to equalize district populations. But they didn't say how the lines had to be drawn. So gerrymandering lived on.
Hi, David Pogue here. And I really don't want to ruin your Sunday, but we have to talk about gerrymandering. Remember when you learned about democracy in school?
One person, one vote, meaning that everyone's vote is as important as everyone else's.
Once every 10 years, state legislatures redraw their voting district maps to reflect any new information in the latest census. Gerrymandering is when they redraw those maps to gain political advantage. Instead of voters choosing their representatives, the representatives choose their voters. And gerrymandering played a big role in this past week's midterms.
DeSantis heavy gerrymandered all of Florida.
Democrats got very greedy in trying to gerrymander New York's maps.
Suppose 15 people live in this state. Now, if your voting districts are simple boxes, then the mauve people will win all 3 districts and you'll send 3 mauves to the House of Representatives, which doesn't seem quite fair to the orange people. So if you adjust the boundaries like this, then one orange person gets elected. But it's also possible to get really ruthless with your redistricting software. You can make it, if you're sneaky, so that 2 orange reps go to Washington. Now you can see why so many voting districts have really wacky shapes.
The problem is politicians don't like to change the rules that got them in power. That's the biggest barrier.
Alex Kina teaches political science at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he's the co-author of 2 books about gerrymandering. Do Republicans and Democrats gerrymander equally?
No, we studied 48 states, just the state legislative maps, and we found that there were 44 gerrymanders, and 42 of those were Republican.
But that's not necessarily because one party is more unscrupulous than the other.
Now, Republicans and Democrats alike are trying to gerrymander if they can. Democrats just have fewer chances to do that. Republicans happen to control more state government than Democrats do, but it's also geography. Democrats want to live in cities. They're all clustered in one area. They're packing themselves for the Republicans.
Now, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 makes it illegal to define a district that deprives a racial group of representation. But following the 2020 census, Alabama drew maps that struck critics as an attempt to cram black voters into a single district. A district court threw out the new maps, but the Supreme Court reinstated them. With 4 months until the primary elections, the Supreme Court said there wasn't enough time to make a change like that they'd consider it after the election. The gerrymanders stayed.
But they've essentially said, probably partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional, but there's nothing we can do.
In the end, in the midterms, 4 states wound up using maps that judges had declared illegal.
It's hard not to get upset. You want to see a country that is free and fair and democratic.
But it's not all over yet. A bunch of states have taken the right to draw maps away from politicians and given it to independent commissions.
What's clear is that when politicians are drawing the line, then we see partisan gerrymandering. But when citizens draw the maps, we see a lot less shenanigans.
And Alex Kina points out that pendulums do swing back, eventually. But it seems like, okay, now we have a conservative-leaning Supreme Court. Of course, they're not going to do anything.
Eventually, people die. And eventually, people retire, and the court changes. All that means is it takes a long time.
Oh, and speaking of imbalance, look at the U.S. Senate. It's malapportioned by design. Every state gets 2 senators, whether it's California with 40 million people or Wyoming with 600,000. That means some voices carry a lot more weight in national decision. The Senate was a compromise with big-time consequences. Congress feels so broken because the structure plus hyper-partisanship plus gerrymandering equals fewer competitive elections. When seats are safe, representatives have no incentive to compromise. They cater to their base, not the whole district. They go further to the left or further to the right to avoid primary challenges, and gridlock becomes the norm. It's not that Congress can't work. It's that it's not built to work well under these conditions.
You can go back 10 years to 2014, and you can see that only about 13% of House districts were competitive. Not much has changed in that 10 years. Let's say you've had enough. You're tired of the gridlock, the excuses, the headlines. You're thinking, well, damn, maybe I should run for Congress. And maybe you should. But let's talk about what that actually means. The Constitution doesn't put up too many barriers to run for office. For the House, you've got to be at least 25, a U.S. citizen for 7 years and live in the state you're running in. For the Senate, you need to be 30, a citizen for 9 years and also live in the state. That's it. No degree, no law license, no political experience. Legally speaking, you could go from bartending to the ballot in a year. And that is not without precedent. Politically speaking, that's a whole different story. There are upsides to getting this gig. You make $174K. You get to shape national policy, represent your community, build influence, and yeah, you'll definitely level up your public speaking game. But them long hours, constant travel, nonstop public scrutiny, you got to fundraise constantly, attend events constantly, manage 2 households if you're not from DC originally. It's grueling, especially if you're working or middle class. And if you're considered poor, a seat in Congress might as well be on the moon in terms of the difficulty and distance of taking it. What former Congresswoman Cori Bush had to say when asked about something she wished she'd known going into the job of representative. Now, having weighed the pros and cons, let's say you're seriously running. Time to get strategic. The first question is this a race you can even win? Can you beat your opponent? Are you running in a district that's even competitive? Because incumbents win like 90 to 95% of the time. They've got the name recognition, the donor networks, media experience, and a full-time staff already working the district. There are really only 3 scenarios for you. You can challenge the incumbent in your own party, which means going up against someone with massive institutional support. You can challenge the incumbent in the opposite party, which means fighting an uphill battle in a district they probably gerrymandered to keep. Or you can run in an open seat election where there's no incumbent. That is your best shot. And then there's the money. Always the money. Can you raise the coins? And I don't mean big. Do you have personal wealth to draw from? Because campaigns are expensive. Media buys, staff, travel, consultants. It all adds up fast. You're not just convincing voters. You're convincing donors, party officials, and volunteers. You're building a political machine from scratch while your opponent already has one up and running.
I would like to talk instead about congressional fundraising, which is much less covered but no less astonishing. In the 2014 election cycle, candidates for the House and Senate raised a combined $1.7 billion. That's a lot of money. Interestingly, much of that money has to be raised one way or another by the politicians themselves, which they have complained about for years and say that it can be the worst part of their job.
If Don and I could tell you how many hours we spend with our good colleagues on our side of the issues talking about raising money, it would be an embarrassment. Because it is an embarrassment.
An embarrassment. That is a strong statement, although he may be overestimating Congress's capacity for embarrassment, because bear in mind, we are talking about a place where these moments happened.
Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam. I do not like green eggs and ham.
But the sheer amount of time politicians spend fundraising is not just embarrassing, it's horrifying. Some say the members can spend anywhere from 25 to 50% of their time on it. But former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle once guessed that in the 2 years before an election, senators can spend 2/3 of their time raising money. Washington is like Rod Stewart's haircut. Party in the front, party in the back. Frankly, too much party and no business anywhere to be found. Many members of Congress will even stage fundraisers at pop concerts.
We have over 10 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 3 PACs, all raising money off this Taylor Swift concert, tickets going into thousands upon thousands of dollars. Some of these members we spoke to, specifically Representative Byer of Virginia, who's having a fundraiser, he goes, his daughter turned him on to Taylor Swift. He likes her feminist lyrics, and that is why they're moving forward.
It's true. Representative Don Byer held a fundraiser at a Taylor Swift concert. And I don't know about you, but this man is not feeling 22. He is feeling and looking very much 65.
Oh, and timing matters too. The national climate can make or break you. Are you riding the wave of a popular president? That's the coattail effect. Are you running in a midterm year when the president's party typically loses seats? That's an uphill climb. Your fate can be tied to someone else's approval rating. The next few slides will show you how Congress is comprised. We'll look at gender, race and ethnicity, veteran status, LGBTQ identifying, foreign-born, education level, religion, and yes, age. So you won. Congratulations. You beat the odds. You raised the coins, kissed the babies, and now you're sworn into Congress. But as fictional Senator-elect Bill McKay once asked, what do we do now? This next part is where most people zone out, but it's where the real power is. You're a friggin' member of Congress. Let's break down what that actually means. Representation is the core of your new job, and there are different ways to do it. You might be a trustee, someone who uses their own judgment, even if it goes against what the district wants in the moment. Or you might be a delegate, someone who acts as a direct mouthpiece for their voters. Most members switch back and forth, depending on the issue, and sometimes it depends on whether it's an election year. You're also expected to do policy representation and fight for laws that help your district's economy or social well-being, do allocative representation, and bring back federal dollars to build roads and fund schools or upgrade other infrastructure. Also do casework and help constituents navigate federal bureaucracy. That means tracking down lost Social Security checks, getting passports expedited, or untangling veterans' benefits. These things don't make headlines, but they win elections, and sometimes lose them. Congress is organized along party lines. The majority party in each chamber sets the agenda. In the House, that means the Speaker is basically supreme. In the Senate, the majority leader calls the shots.
Article 1, Section 5 states only that each chamber may determine the rules of its proceedings. The first Congress, which was held from 1789 to 1791, set a precedent that is followed to this day by creating committees and adopting rules that govern how each house functions. Both the House and the Senate have standing or permanent committees. Each committee, such as the House Agriculture Committee or the Senate Appropriations Committee, has jurisdiction over particular subjects and appoints subcommittees to examine proposals within specific areas. In committees and subcommittees, proposals can be examined carefully and various perspectives heard. It is common for these committees and subcommittees to hold public hearings to receive testimony from individuals and groups on matters of interest to them. One important function of Congress is to hold oversight hearings, during which members of administrative agencies may be called on to testify regarding how they carry out laws. In the committees and subcommittees of the United States Congress, the careful, deliberative work of Congress occurs. The House of Representatives currently has 20 standing committees. The Senate has 16. There are also a number of subcommittees and joint committees, as well as select committees that address specific issues, such as the House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Committee assignments shape members' careers within Congress, enable them to serve their constituents' interests, and sometimes provide them national prominence. Both chambers use select committees and task forces, which usually have specific assignments and exist for a limited time. For example, a select committee was created to review James Madison's proposal for a Bill of Rights during the first session of Congress because members feared that using the regular committee process might take too long. Individual members of committees, such as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, conduct personal investigations and make on-site visits related to their committee assignment.
It's no secret that power in Congress isn't always about talent or bold ideas. It's often about seniority. Committee power, better offices, leadership roles all go to people who've been around the longest. That seniority system rewards loyalty and patience, but it can also block new voices from having influence. If you're serving your first term, you're likely to be stuck on the backbench, unless you raise hell, you go viral, or prove that you're indispensable. Committees are where the real work happens, and there are different types. Standing committees handle the ongoing permanent work, like agriculture, armed services, or education. Select committees are temporary, handle specific issues like cybersecurity or the pandemic response. Conference committees come in when the House and the Senate pass different versions of the same bill. Their job is to reconcile the differences. If you want to shape policy, your committee assignment matters a ton. Now that you're in the job, maybe it'd be nice to know what exactly you can do, how you can actually get something done. So let's talk about how a bill becomes a law.
For survivors of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, Saturday's big turnout was just a step toward an even larger goal.
We are demanding an assault weapons ban. We are demanding the prohibition of sales of high-capacity magazines. And we are demanding universal background checks.
Having led the way at this weekend's March for Our Lives rallies, students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School are now turning their attention to this year's midterm elections.
We're going to be revving up for the election. This is not the end. This was just the beginning.
The students say they'll target candidates who refuse to support what they call common sense gun laws.
The most important thing they can do, register and vote. End of the day, that's the way you change democracy.
If you're in the Senate, you've got the filibuster to deal with. That's where a senator can delay or block a bill by refusing to shut up. It takes 60 votes to break it. That's called cloture. The filibuster is why even if a bill has majority support, it can still fail. It's power by paralysis.
Hi, this is Ron Elving, and welcome to my office hours. Today, we're going to talk about the filibuster. People regarded it as a nuclear weapon. Just the most extreme part of your arsenal as a senator. You only used it for one or two issues that were absolutely the most important thing to you, like Southern senators and civil rights. The filibuster came about because the Senate has never really had very many rules that they really followed, and senators were allowed to extend debate for hours, for days, forever. And as a result, they were able to kill legislation without ever having a vote on it. The House and Senate have always had very different procedures and very different voting procedures because the House is so much larger, so many more members of the House. And the Senate was always a kind of exclusive club where people got to know each other much more personally, served for longer periods of time, and considered each other to be colleagues. So over the generations in the 1800s, senators were allowed to debate things at any length they wanted and talk bills to death if they wished. And there wasn't any restriction on that until about the time of the First World War, 100 years ago. And when they did start to restrict it, it took a vote of 2/3 of all senators to invoke cloture and stop a filibuster. Filibusters were rare, votes of cloture were even more rare, and the filibuster was a very powerful weapon. Eventually, as part of a reform in the 1970s, the Democrats, when they were in the majority, reduced the number of votes that it took to shut down a filibuster and proceed to a vote to just 3/5 of the Senate, or 60 votes. Seemed more controlled, but it had a rather unexpected and pernicious, in some people's minds, effect. When it went down to 3/5 or just 60 votes, it didn't seem nearly as nuclear a weapon. In fact, it eventually became like a sidearm the cowboys wore, like a 6-shooter on their hip when they walked into a saloon in an old Western movie. Everybody had one. Everybody could see you had one. And it was like a constant threat to use it, but you didn't actually have to use it for it to have its desired effect. People used it to sort of threaten that they might extend debate without ever actually having to do it. And nowadays, any substantial action is subject to at least a threat of a filibuster. I'm Ron Elving. Thanks for coming to my office hours.
If the bill clears both chambers and avoids the filibuster, it goes to the president. If the president signs it, congratulations, it's law. If they veto it, Congress can override it with a 2/3 vote in both chambers. Rare, but possible. And just like that, the long, winding journey from idea to law comes to an end. Now the consequences. Congress is the most powerful branch on paper and the most criticized, maybe even the most misunderstood in practice. It was designed to be the center of national American political life and power. But it's slow and partisan in its present context. The slowness was by design. The tribalism and partisanship, not so much. The framers wanted friction. They wanted debate. They wanted a system that forced negotiation and made sweeping change hard to pull off. That's why Congress is a battlefield of competing interests, ideologies, and priorities. It reflects us, divided, imperfect, but capable of collective action when the stakes are high enough. Congress is overloaded, it's outflanked, and often captured by dysfunction, but it's still the engine of democratic power. Understanding how it works is the first step to holding it accountable, because ignoring it just hands the power to someone else.